This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Well, we'll get right into it, and we'll just start at the beginning, starting with the MK Ultra stuff. What was it that first caused you to suspect maybe either that there such a program existed or that you were indeed a part of that program?
It started when I was 50. Until then, I think maybe I'd heard the term MK Ultra, but I had never, I didn't know much about it. But suddenly I found myself unemployed with 24/7 internet, so I could just read all day and all night sometimes. And it was a coincidental thing that really happened. I decided I wanted to look into my family history, and especially what happened to my father in 1962 when he was put in the Allen Memorial in Montreal, and it was, quite traumatic for our family. But so in 2003, 2002, something like 2003, around then, 2002, 2003, I had time, and I thought, well, I'll write a memoir about my dad, and our family, and I started. On a completely different tack, I had become very interested in Dr. Mengele. I'd traveled to Auschwitz that summer, and I suddenly became curious about whether there were records of Mengele or whether working for the CIA. So that was my first Google search. And where it took me, at the very top of the search, list. What do you call that? I got it said Dr. Mengele, Allen Memorial, Montreal, 1962.
Wow!
It just said that. So I went, oh, Allen Memorial. My dad was in the Allen Memorial. Dr. Cameron, 1962. How can these two things be connected?
Yeah.
And Mengele and that. My family. So that was the beginning of several months of research, and then I just read everything that there was that I could find on MK Ultra. And it took me a year before I was ready to even entertain the thought that I had been involved in it as a child. But the more I learned and the more people I talked to, I began to see that my whole family had been involved in it.
And what was your father hospitalized for?
Well, that was the question. He was not. He was a high school music teacher, and he had just put together the Christmas concert at the high school, and he was kind of, he had just turned 60, and I was 12, right? My twin brother, and I were 12, and all of a sudden. I think what may have precipitated it was an argument or a fight with my mother. Something was going on, and all of a sudden, our dad did not come home. He was in the hospital, and it was mysterious. Of course, we weren't being told everything because our parents, they didn't tell us things. Sure. But possibly we thought a nervous breakdown. I'm not so sure. I think when you go, when I checked in and learned more about my father, got his military records, learned more and more about him, I realized he was Air Force intelligence, and so was Dr. Cameron of the Allen Memorial. So Dr. Cameron, who came from around, who was living down here where I am now near Lake Placid, was maybe in some ways my father's superior, but he would have been RAF and my dad was Royal Canadian Air Force. And the wartime, my father had been in the Signals Corps. And I mean, that played a part in this whole thing. So, I mean, I'm sorry I don't have a short answer to that.
God, no.
But he was not a mental patient. He had no diagnosis, and even his medical records showed no diagnosis of mental illness. What they found were mini strokes, ischemic, what do they call those? Attacks, what do they call MIs? Yeah.
So he went in, they told you that he was in for a nervous breakdown, or you think that's just an excuse?
Implied it. Yeah, but I've been sort of told that it was more than that. There was something going on at work. There were people at work, other teachers who were involved in the MK Ultra program, because the whole school board that he was part of, that he worked for, I know from research, was collaborating with McGill and sending children, teenagers who had problems, disruptive kids and so on. They were sending them to Dr. Cameron to be fixed. Which,
that's creepy.
And guidance counselors and so on would feed the kids. But I mean, I have a sense my dad, he had a little bit of a paranoid streak, but it was more like a Scottish, kind of Presbyterian attitude. He was mistrustful in some ways of people based on life experience. And I have a feeling that there was something happened at work that was political in nature, and that contributed to.
So did he behave differently when he got back? Did he say anything about his visit?
Yeah. He said he came back, he didn't recognize us.
Wow.
That was after 6 weeks in the hospital. We visited him one time, and he was just very passive and very weak. And, then after 6 weeks, they sent him home, and he didn't seem to know who we were. And then he went to bed. And the following Monday, I'll just say, he got up and went to work, or got dressed, went out the door with his briefcase back to school. But I have only recently, I always believed that he managed to go back to teaching. But in fact, no, he was going down to the hospital. He was a day patient of Dr. Cameron, and the treatments were continuing as an outpatient. But my parents were pretending that they didn't want my brother and I to know that our dad was so badly, damaged, basically, and that his career was finished. So he took early retirement a few months later. But I've only recently, I found the yearbook and realized that it says he's gone. He left in December and never came back.
Wow.
And so what he said, he was very passive. He afterwards, he had been kind of difficult and tended to get angry easily. That was possibly part of the problem. But he wasn't violent, or he was just a little bit what's the word? He was crusty, he was but when he came back, he was vague, and we would play board games with him, and he would try to be nice, but it's almost like he was learning to be himself again. And one time I remember he said to me, they're not doing anything good down at that hospital.
Wow.
He said that, But I said, Dad, they're just psychiatrists trying to help people. He said, you don't know what you're talking about. he knew, he was, I think 6 weeks wasn't enough to completely reduce him to vegetable status.
So
he recovered,
So there was maybe some electric shock therapy going on, or?
In LSD, I'm sure of the LSD, and I'm sure of it's not in his records because they sanitized the records. I wasn't able
Yeah.
to get the records of the treatment he got from Dr. Cameron, but no doubt in my mind he was electroshocked, and the LSD I know about because he started bringing it home, and we were taking it too.
And
So I
what
mean,
after he brought it home, you took it?
well, actually, he was going down to the hospital as a patient, and we didn't know.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I didn't know, and
Mhm.
and he was coming home at night, and he came back
Uh-huh.
with a tonic that we were supposed to take at bedtime. And we would take this. It was called Wampols, but there was something in that tonic because both my brother and I mean, later we talked about, much later, we would start to experience LSD, like getting off on LSD, where you have
Wow.
distortions of time and space and everything. It goes crazy. And I was
Wow.
12. I would get up in the morning and go to school, but often at night I would be hallucinating, and I heard a message playing in my head that is this one of the messages that was on, Dr. Cameron's famous depatterning tapes, the
Yes.
recordings that
Uh-huh.
would give people, instructions and so, or, judgments and so on.
Mhm.
So I would hear hundreds of times in my bed at night, um, "You're no good." A man's voice was talking to me. "You're no good. You will fail. You will never succeed at anything." I heard that
Wow.
hundreds of times. And,
Wow.
where did that come from? I think it came from the pillows that he also brought home, which were foam rubber, and he said, "These are better pillows, now you'll use these pillows." And so we had
Wow.
these new foam rubber pillows. I suspect there was a speaker in the pillow playing the recording. So, yeah, our whole family was pulled into this thing.
Including your mom? Did she
I think
experience?
so, but, she never, yeah, she got very ill after she developed a lot of um, arthritis and couldn't, and essentially became an invalid very quickly.
Mm.
So it's a disaster, the whole thing.
Yeah, that's very, very intense. And was it around this time that you
Right.
recalled at 50 years old, around the time that you started going to this hospital too, or was that some time after
No,
that?
okay. At 50, I was living in British Columbia, and I
Mhm.
started looking back at
Yeah.
this strange time in our family, which had been 40 years earlier.
Mhm.
And my parents had, in the meantime, they died. There was no one to ask, and I thought I was going to write about it.
Mhm.
So I hope this is somehow making sense, these switches and,
Sure.
traveling in time a bit, but
Yeah, yeah.
but it was in 2003, I was out west. I had unemployment insurance, meaning I had 6 months. It was like a little writing grant, and I had the internet, and I could, study and read and do all these things, and I
Mhm.
said, "I'm gonna write about my family now and what happened to us, whatever
Mm.
that was."
Mhm.
And that's when the research started, and the research just went on and on and on, and I wrote a book in the end. I wrote a memoir called My Cold War. Yeah, was about which I couldn't find a publisher for, but I self-published it. And
Oh, good. And was it
yeah.
received did a lot of people show interest in it?
Um, Publishers slammed doors in my faces and in my face and took me off their mailing lists, and my people that I had a track record with, like publishing.
Mhm.
Um, I'd written poetry, fiction, and that kind of thing.
Sure.
And I came out with this manuscript, and the reaction was instantaneous, automatic. No, and I think because I was not the first person to come forward with a story like this, and they had instructions in Canada not to ever touch this, you know, this history. It's
Mhm.
it's basically hidden history in Canada
Yeah.
still, even though it came out via the United States. Really, we wouldn't
Mhm.
know about it if American media hadn't picked up on it.
Yeah, you alluded to, a radio station that did sort of a multi-part series on it, and I went and
Oh yeah,
found it on the Internet Archive, and I'm gonna play some of that before this episode when I finally put it together, but it was pretty
very good.
extensive. Yeah.
It was. No, that's true. Yeah, in 1998, that was Ryerson University, I think, the student
Mhm.
radio station,
Yes.
CKLN. That's the
Yeah, yeah.
one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, in 1998, they did do uh, a whole series, and they had all kinds of people like Colin Ross and Claudia Mullen, all this, survivors, therapists, and
Mhm.
it's a great series. But the events were back in the 60s, and the story of the children of the Allen Memorial is told on by CKLN, by some of the therapists, I think, talking. But um, it's basically taboo to talk about that in Canada. Talk about
Mhm.
the children. You can talk about the patients who, adults who were reduced to vegetable, like, condition, but you cannot say there were children.
Yeah.
It's just starting now to come out.
And was it during the research for that book that sort of memories started surfacing
I had always
for
had
you?
some memories. Yeah, I
Mhm.
had always had memories.
Uh-huh.
Like, I had had memories from the age of 4. I tried to tell my mother, when I was 4 or 5, I said, I went to this place and they were torturing children and they were tied to an assembly line belt, and there were witches and there were witches with long pointy sticks, and I tried to tell my mother. Um, that is, uh, and I wrote, and then I later in the 1980s, I wrote a short story about that. Because at that time, in the 1980s, I thought I just had a wild imagination as a child
Yeah.
with a tendency, to imagine sadomasochistic, torture and things like that.
Yeah.
But in 2003, I corresponded with a survivor who had an account of exactly the same scenario, and
Mhm.
she had, the witches, the cattle prods, um, and the children tied to an assembly line, sort of like a belt, a luggage belt
Like a
in an
conveyor belt?
airport,
Yeah.
Mm.
tied down, and she had all of that in her description. So I wrote to her, and she had been in China Lake, in California. That's one of the sites, the MK Ultra sites.
Mhm.
So it's enormous underground
And
facility.
and of course, these were the doctors dressed as witches so that you could recount that and your parents weren't supposed to believe that, right?
Well, that's it. Yeah, my mother
Yeah.
just. I remember very clearly telling her, there were witches, and she said, "You had a bad dream. You had a bad dream." She had no
Yeah.
idea what was happening, but they were flying me. It seems they were flying me out of Montreal and Air Force planes, and my parents. I don't know what they thought, but they were there. They knew. They knew about that. Can you follow all this? It's
Yeah,
Yes,
surrealistic.
sure.
Now
absolutely.
it's known, right? It's known about, so I don't sound so crazy
No, not
when I
at
talk
all.
about it,
No, you're right at home, in this on this
Yeah,
podcast because we talk about this stuff a lot. So, yeah,
yeah,
no, it doesn't sound crazy at all. I mean, it sounds crazy that
yeah.
something like that happened, but your recounting of it does not sound crazy at all. Um, what was I going to say? Oh, do you think that, or do you know that your parents willingly gave maybe these people permission to experiment on you and your brother, or
Um, it was a combination. I think it was essentially blackmail.
Mhm.
That's what I've been told. I got my father's military records, and I saw the evidence for that. He was threatened with a dishonorable discharge, um, because he'd been late returning from leave, and they put him in the brig for 2 weeks. This was during the war. This is in 1943, and then what would happen at that point is they basically own the person. They own him. They can threaten him. He'd never get a job. He'd never.
Yeah.
And so I think when the artichoke program started, which was
Mhm.
before MK Ultra,
Yeah.
I think he was. I suspect because of certain symptoms he had that he was asked to volunteer for that, and then 1950, so that'd be about 1950,
Mhm.
1951. My brother and I were born. Um, 2 years later comes MK Ultra, 1953, and I think because I've compared notes with other survivors, it was often a case of the father being blackmailed by the military. Like Carol Rutz, that was the case, I think, for her father.
Yeah.
They had to give their children, or it's like, we'll give us your kids or you won't ever work again in this town,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
And of course, they probably, when they agreed to do that, they probably had no idea what they were getting into.
As far as I know, they were told that it was a wonderful opportunity for their
Yeah, I'm
kids, that
sure.
it was a gifted children's program.
Yeah.
And we were special and wonderful things would happen,
Mm.
and they believed it.
Yeah.
Why would they not?
Exactly. People trusted the military and authority figures back then. Not so much now, but especially after all this stuff came out.
Yeah.
So what was I going to say after that? What do you think that the purpose of this program was? Do you think it was just experimentation, doing things just to see what would happen, or do you think that there was an intent behind it?
Well, I don't know. I got the feeling a bit of both, but they were they were up for anything, and then leaving them with plausible deniability when it was all over. They could say, "Well, we didn't know what we were doing, and it didn't work." But I think I think the main purpose. I mean, it was a vast program, so it's hard to make a judgment. But I would say at McGill, at McGill University in Montreal, I think they had a great interest in Manchurian Candidate programming, and creating media people, politicians, and programmable agents and spies, because I know people that came out of it, and and all the publicity goes to all the newspaper coverage and so on, media coverage goes to the patients who were older, people who had kids who were put in the hospital and then, and really worked over, I mean, with LSD and so on, and electroshock, and came out, that was the depatterning, right? It was supposed to cure schizophrenia. But I think that was really, in many ways, it was a cover story for what they were really doing, which was creating schizophrenia, i.e. fragmented personalities who could be programmed. And they weren't really, why would they be interested in 50-year-olds, who are not, why would they were interested in the children, in my opinion, because the children would become assets in the future, and they were investing money in us, really.
Sure.
And so that's my belief, and the idea was a more controllable society, such as we have now.
Yeah, exactly.
We've had this discussion, Chris and I have had this discussion. We have kind of this ongoing debate about the counterculture and where the counterculture falls in all of this. When we look at people who are extremely famous in the 60s, like Jim Morrison, for example, his father was in the military. There's a lot of people that kind of came up during that time whose parents had military backgrounds. Do you think that part of the impetus of the counterculture was to use LSD and psychedelics to maybe to some degree create either race wars or riots, or just as an overall experiment to maybe disarm some people who were questioning authority and questioning military and the military involvement in Vietnam, for example? Do you think that LSD and these drugs were kind of inserted into the culture and used to do that?
Well, I'm a sort of more of a middle of the roader on that one. I'm not, I'm not an expert on what I've seen and what I've read and what I hear. I think number one, LSD was invented, but came out of Switzerland in 1943, right? So it was there, and then they started looking right away. They started looking at it as some kind of military weapon, and then I think it ran away. I think they just played their systems theories and their game, and their game theories and so on. They just, let's see what happens, but let's control the outcome as much as possible too, So I think it was a combination. I mean, I don't have I'm not anti-LSD because I tried it, but I think I tried it when I was 12 years old, without knowing I was trying it. And then later I dropped acid when I was 18, a couple of times. And so I saw everyone around me was doing it. Definitely this, I could say the second time I dropped acid, that was an experiment because there were people combing the halls of the university that day, giving out purple tabs, and hundreds of people took it. And that was a day in Montreal I remember very well. And after that, I said, I'm never taking this again. But a lot of kids ended up in hospital that day.
Wow.
And that had to. I know who gave me that tab of acid, and he is a politician now. So, and with connections to the military, his brother is in the military. And so, I mean, I look at, that's one thing. I mean, I think it was a combination because we took it not for that. We didn't take it because we wanted to be controlled. We took it because we wanted to be free,
Yeah.
And we did learn things from it. I don't know about you, if but I mean, there were great lessons that came out of it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That's why it seems like you can only control an experiment like that so much. That's why it's almost like an experiment in chaos, in a sense that, everybody's going to react to it differently. If you drop I think Timothy Leary, what concert did he fly over? Monterey or something, and dropped acid out of a helicopter. Yeah, I mean, there's no way you can control that experiment, but they will get to see a lot of different reactions of how people react under the influence of acid. And I'm sure there were people there taking notes or documenting it somehow. But yeah, it seems like it could easily get out of hand. Do you think that they experimented with any other controlled substances with you in the programs?
I don't know about me. I mean, I haven't been able to get my records. I've seen my psychiatry file, and it dates from 1955. So I was 4 years old.
Okay.
I went in and cold, one day and tried to get my psychiatry file. Well, tried to get my medical file from McGill. I had no idea I had a psychiatry file, and they were so nervous. I had to come back, and then I ended up seeing the emptied folder, and it said psychiatry on it. And I really thought I was going in for my pneumonia. At 4 I had pneumonia, supposedly. Well, I did, but I think that's the moment when I was put into the experiment, Dr. Cameron's LSD experiment. And in terms of what I think it was mainly about LSD. My only, the only memory I have is from these LSD like experiences that I had when I was 12. I know they were giving LSD to children, and I know Cameron was doing that. I think I was in that. Were they giving us things like truth serum? I don't know if that works on kids, but that would be another drug. They were testing that on adults for sure. And then they were giving, then they had all the psych drugs they were testing, like Largactil or, chlorpromazine. And I don't know how many of those were given to kids or under what circumstances,
I know sometimes.
Probably, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No, what was that?
Well, I'm just thinking that there were children they had in labs who were resident children who they might have given anything to because they had no parents. They were orphans, and so they were basically lab rats. Exactly. But I was always going home, so I was in another category of, child. I would be like a weekend child or something.
I wonder if there were more permanent residents there. I guess maybe the ones that didn't have parents.
Yes, the orphans and the native kids. Yeah, they would go to native reserves and just steal children and bring them down to the hospital. That's being investigated right now in Montreal by the Mohawk community, Mohawk mothers.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Good luck on them finding records of all of that. But A lot of redacting taking place, I would imagine. Did you have any, do you recall having any unique abilities? I mean, sometimes when they cull kids together for these programs, they stand out for one reason or another. Do you think that that was a case with you, or was it just because your dad made a deal with them to where they were able to blackmail him?
No, I think I had genetically, like I had a grandmother who was known for, for being very psychic,
Mhm.
second sight, Celtic background. There's also some Mohawk on my father's side, I think. So there, those are the bloodlines. My mother was, oh yeah, and my mother on her side was French Canadian
Mm.
and pure Norman bloodlines. Those are they were in demand, those bloodlines, and it's partly because they're easy to program.
Mhm.
Those, that about that. Uh, Apparently black people are not programmable.
Mm.
They cannot be manipulated in the same way that these Irish, like Celtic bloodlines can. But also Native Americans have, the ability to time travel or different. They have these special. They say, they often end up. They often work for NASA, or because they have cosmic consciousness of. I mean, first, you can't really make. I don't know what these things all mean really, but I
Yeah,
know
sure.
um, they like the Celts for
Mm.
programming. And
Interesting.
so I think I had that. I can dissociate. I mean, I recognize that about myself, and that was a pain. I'm not affected very much by pain. For that's one of my qualities. And
Mm.
my twin brother, was very musical, so he had kind of special musical talent. And what my talent? My talent was I was quick to learn. I don't
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
Anyway.
Interesting, and it seems like these programs are drawn to twins too, for whatever reason. Yeah, that's a recurring theme.
Well, and Mengele, of course, is famous for his twin
Mhm.
experiment. So that
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
I think it's more than just they can do the comparison. They can, but what is it? Twin studies. You have the comparison you
Yeah.
can do. But
Mhm.
I think it's also that twins. I have been told, in certain cultures, twins are selected for shamanic, for their shamanic abilities.
Hmm, interesting.
They tend to be, shamans, chosen to be shamans.
Yeah. Do you have something? Okay. So what was McGill? Was it a university? Was it a medical clinic? What were they doing there before they were conducting all these experiments? Or was it always nefarious in this way?
McGill is quite a place. Well, it was, I think it was, when did it open? In the early 1800s.
Oh, wow.
Um, it was, so I can tell you quite a bit about McGill. I mean, at
Do.
least
Please do.
as long as I can organize my mind around it. First of all, the Scots in Montreal fur trading. So there was a lot of money from fur trading, and they were very interested in establishing themselves, you know, in the new colony. So they built institutions, and first thing I guess was a university, churches, and so on, and then a university. So McGill, I guess, got a charter sometime in the early 1800s. As it evolved, it became a center for experimental psychology, which was quite rare. It
Mhm.
carved out a niche for itself in the early 20th century. So as a place where you didn't just well, psychology was a new field, so it
Mhm.
didn't have much status, and it wasn't scientific enough, so that McGill offered its services as a place of research, which I suspect meant that they were drawing on humans early on, but it was also known for eugenics,
Mhm.
and that came over from England. I mean, the British were the leaders in eugenics.
Yeah, yeah.
So some important eugenicists were based at McGill, and they have been known. McGill has always been considered to have a great contempt for minorities. They didn't let Jews in. They didn't let French Canadians. They didn't like French Canadians, and they were an Anglo institution.
Mhm.
That looked down on the population of Montreal, and this is the absolute proof. I mean, they used unwitting people as guinea pigs. So that's something to know about McGill. And
Sure.
it's always been a racist. It has a reputation for being racist, and colonial, and military funded, big time. Lots of military funding, and that's been going on for decades and decades.
And
So
aren't they connected to Tavistock somehow?
yeah, it was in this case. I think there
Uh-huh.
were some of the people came over from Tavistock. They came to McGill in the 1950s
Mhm.
and even maybe the 40s. But some of the doctors that worked with Cameron, at least one or two that I can think of, were Tavistock people. So they
Mhm.
were. I think it was a satellite, and the MK Ultra program at McGill was really a satellite program of Tavistock. I mean, they were carrying out the work, but in a remote location, in a city that didn't have, I don't know, the social networks. People were on their own. It was in some ways, the frontier. I mean, Montreal had a very for Canada was very well organized and very built up and very sophisticated. But
Mhm.
but by comparison, maybe with England, they were able to do things to people in Montreal that they couldn't have done back home
Mhm.
or in America.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't you say at one, I think during one of the many interviews that I listened to, that during your childhood, at some point, there were like 100 unaccounted for days that just, it's like,
Of my school year.
yeah. Wha-
Yeah,
can you explain that, or what you think might have happened, or?
there's so many things like that. Well, I mean, I got my report card at the end of the year,
Uh-huh.
and I had all like excellence. My teacher said, "Oh, look at Anne. She's missed 100 days, and she's still like really doing very well." And I thought I was very happy, to get my report card. But I had 100, yeah, 100 days absence. It's out of 200, so exactly 100, and
Wow.
that's kind of telling, I
Right.
think. And I was told, and I did spend time at home with various childhood illnesses, but you still I mean, how many times can you have mumps and measles,
Yeah, exactly. And
So my understanding is they were taking me out of school and
mhm.
taking me, because people then later in life said, "Well, I knew you at McGill when you were a kid." I'd go, "That's never at McGill." But I had no memory, but I would come back to class. I remember coming back in grade 3 and sort of vomiting in the classroom. And in second grade, that's when I missed 100 days. And I remember I have, very scattered memories of that. It's like I wasn't really there. I was really at McGill. I was,
Crazy.
I was downtown a lot. Yeah. Seems
Wow.
like it's hard, because if I could get those records, but they won't
Yeah,
give me my records.
of course. Is McGill still around today?
McGill is still Canada's premier, one of the top universities in Canada after
Insane.
University of Toronto. Yeah. Oh,
Insane.
absolutely. It's world class. Yeah.
How they have not been shut down at this point is, that's crazy. That's totally nuts. So
Well, as
what,
I say, in Canada, you can get away with a lot.
yeah, I mean, the last 3 years have kind of proven that.
Yes. Oh, you were talking about COVID.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kind of a crazy
Yeah.
place to be during COVID. At least
Oh,
that's
yeah.
what we hear down here.
Yeah, I think it was a lot crazier in
Mhm.
Canada. People were very regimented in their, seems. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wonder if part of the reason that your father had a breakdown was because of what was happening to you and your brother. If maybe on some level this kind of fragmented part of his brain realized that what was happening was probably wrong.
Yeah, I think he had to realize. I think he knew quite a lot. And I think he also knew that there wasn't a lot that he could do about it, without getting a lot of trouble at work, for example. And I some of these things I speculate a bit, but it seems that I didn't go on in the programming. It seems as though he got us out. My brother, I think, kind of fell out of the program early on, but I was, I was going forward in it. And I think what happened is to me was they got me out, or they negotiated something. I don't know. And anyway, I didn't go on into the full, treatment that I think happened to other people, some of whom I knew later on, some people I met later. And I have number one, I have amnesia for the whole thing. But when I was in my 20s, I met people who remembered being in the program, and they said they remembered me. You see, so this is the whole thing. And I would just stare at them. It took me the longest time to realize, that what I'd been through. I think also to realize that I really did get a lot of electroshock, and I had, and my memory was wiped quite early on. It's a whole, I don't know if I'll ever get the full story, but
Sure.
I can now put pieces together of a whole puzzle, that was my life, that only makes sense.
Yeah.
If I was part of this experiment. Yeah. And I think my dad was quite brave, actually. In the end, I have, a lot of respect for him, because I think he did it I think he risked himself a lot. He took risks.
And how does your relationship with your brother play out? Were you able to talk about these things with your brother?
Only after I wrote my book, which was in 2004 or 5, and and my brother read it, or at least he read some of it. He had a hard time believing it at first, and then it takes time. There's a lot of barriers you have to get over to believing such a thing is even possible.
Yeah.
And that was the whole point of the program, was to make you not believe in it, right?
Yes.
And not remember. So he slowly began to remember things, and we talked about things, and the hardest thing for him was to imagine our parents having allowed it to happen to us. That was very tough for him, as it was for me too.
Sure.
He died in 2012, and his health he was in poor health towards the end of his life. And he had a whole LSD. He took a lot of LSD in the 70s. And
recreationally or through the program?
Yeah,
recreationally.
But you really wonder about the boundary, the borders, between what is, what is your own choice, and the people you get involved with, and those kind. And he was a musician, and he hung out with musicians, and they did a lot of LSD. That's
those bohemians.
Yeah.
Something seems to be making a noise on having to do with your phone. It's like a little
really?
dinging. Yeah. I don't know what that could be, but just maybe if there's something that might be hitting it.
Oh, yes, dinging. There could be messages coming in. I thought I disabled those. Do you want me to?
No, it's not like that. It's not like that kind of dinging. It's more like something is knocking up against it or something, like a.
Oh, I'm knocking
on your
against
sleeve
the
or
lamp.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm knocking the lamp. Okay, sorry.
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Oh, sorry. I don't know when I started doing that. Yeah. I stopped.
No big deal. What was I going to say? Oh, whatever happened to Ewen Cameron? Did he die?
Died.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he was climbing. Is it Mount Washington? It's a mountain around here in the Adirondacks somewhere. That's where I am now. And he wasn't very old. Yeah, I think he was 67.
Oh wow.
And he died. He had a heart attack, supposedly.
Supposedly.
Instantly, the CIA was at his door after he died, and they took all his files. They took all the files away. So I sort of wonder about his death too.
Yeah, exactly. Did he ever
get patsy? I mean, not patsy. What's that? Scapegoat. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They could pin everything on him.
taken to task or anything for it? Did he ever get held
Um,
accountable?
he was he left in disgrace. He left Montreal in 1964 in disgrace. Um, there had been reports and people complaining for, and trying to do something about him for years.
Hmm.
And there were demonstrations even, I've
Oh,
been
wow.
told. Yeah, but small, people
Uh-huh.
who knew that their family members or their friends had gone into the island, with minor neurosis or something and
Sure.
come out full blown, psychotic or completely couldn't never function again. And
Hmm.
so they did the and it was all hushed up. But uh, I think Kennedy's assassination seems to have been a turning point.
Mm.
And there's a story that Lee Harvey Oswald came to Montreal in the summer of 1963, and there's a story that he saw Dr. Cameron, that he was one of the Manchurian candidates. They,
Interesting.
that's that circulates.
Yeah, that would make total sense, actually.
I think
So
there's
then
probably
I read an account that right within a week after Kennedy's assassination, the CIA
Mhm.
were in Cameron's lab
Wow.
examining everything he was doing, and that's why he was shut down.
Hmm.
But I can give you I'm not sure of the reference for that, but it was a book,
Mhm.
so.
have you read Chaos by Tom O'Neill, where he talks about
But
Jolly West, a book called Chaos by a writer named Thomas O'Neill. And he talks about Jolly West working, I believe, with Cameron. And right after the Oswald assassination, West went to see Jack Ruby, and there's
Yeah,
accounts of what happened in that exchange, that Jack Ruby was a Manchurian candidate. So it seems like the tentacles of this are very far reaching and lots of people were involved. I wonder if you what your relationship with other universities is. Have you heard about other people in other universities? I've heard like Carl Rogers was involved with, who was famous psychologist who started group
right,
therapies. Um,
right.
so from the research I've done, the MK Ultra program really targeted universities, hospitals,
Mhm.
these institutions where there were large bodies of students coming in and out, and using them as experiments and using these departments as experiments, like the anthropology department or the psychology department, sociology departments. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that was happening. I don't know I don't know all the places where it was happening, but I know that, there were 149 known sub-projects.
Mm,
I think a really big center was um, Ithaca, Cornell. You know
mm,
about that, right? And the what it was, the Institute for Studies in Human Ecology. I forget. I always get the name a bit off, but the Human Ecology Institute, which funded MK Ultra, including the experiments at McGill in Montreal, that was based at Cornell. It's still there. I don't know. It's now it's really involved in climate science, But I think Ithaca was a big center. That's just one that I've heard, anecdotally. I've heard about people like Joan Baez's father was there,
mm,
physics professor, but
mhm,
also a survivor from Northern Ontario she was very active for a long time. Her name was Lynn Moss Sharman, told me she as a child was taken to Ithaca and was
mm,
experimented on. And she has drawings, and um, she had quite detailed memories. She was originally from Ontario,
mm,
Southern Ontario, and father was a Freemason, and
Mhm.
low level military, like a private or something, but ended up putting his daughter in and she was taken to Ithaca and upstate New York, around Lake Erie, that
mm.
area.
What are your
And
thoughts about the psychedelic movement now? How Johns Hopkins University is doing experiments, and it really seems to be like there is this sudden reawakening of psychedelics, and it's becoming normalized. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm not thrilled about that. I mean, I wouldn't advise people. It's too. My personal feeling is, watch your step when you get involved with those things. You don't know where they lead, and you don't. If you have, for example, missing time, you know, you can't
Yes.
recover. You don't recover whatever you give away when you try these things.
Mhm.
You're the last one to know, as far as I'm concerned, about what is really going on. I mean, they could be microdosing people and helping them with their whatever it is that helps with, neurosis, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and those kinds of things. But what's the ultimate purpose of it all, And what are those? I don't know. I just don't like to surrender. I don't surrender myself to religions either,
Mhm.
So I mean, um, people should really think twice, I think.
I do find the timing very interesting when we kind of look at the timeline of all of this happening in relation to COVID. Suddenly, there's
Yeah.
all of these experiments happening, and it's they're trying to mainstream psychedelics.
So benign, so
Mhm.
yeah, I know. Everyone's compassionate and everything we do is just to help,
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm very well, I have every reason to not to be mistrustful. And
For
I think
sure.
people should just, yeah. How do you know? I mean, they're experts. You don't question experts once you sign yourself over to those experiments. I mean, you have no idea,
Yep.
you know.
especially when they're saying, "Oh, you have to do it in a clinical setting," and
It's
it's
synthesized.
very controlled, the setting that they have you in. And just that comment you made about the pillow, that is something that it's very possible to pipe in music or subliminal messages into an environment like that, and you would be caught unawares, in that circumstance, thinking, okay, well, I've signed this document that says that, everything I do is in confidentiality, but you could also be signing away your freedom and, what's happening, on a subconscious level. Who knows what influence that they are trying to have, and again, to see what happens.
Yeah, and I know they're using memory erasing drugs now in surgery.
Hmm.
Um, you know, well, and so it's supposedly, it's to prevent you from experiencing or remembering the trauma.
Hmm.
You know about those? That's
I've never heard
becoming
of them.
common practice.
Wow.
Yeah, and they did it to my brother before he died. I mean, I have another little story about that. I don't know what happened, but after my brother went in for a surgical, minor, it was fairly minor, but they put him, um, as he was leaving, they put him under, I guess, or they told him as he was leaving that they'd given him a memory erasing drug.
Mm.
And he said, I didn't give permission for that. And they said, well, this is what we do now, so it's to erase I don't know. He left, and within a month, he was dead. Now,
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, he had health problems, but basically, he stopped eating and he
Wow.
lost interest in life. Is it causally connected? I don't know if it is, but I know that that's what happened. And it was McGill University that did it, their
Jeez.
hospital. So McGill, oh, you asked about McGill. The other thing to know about McGill is that it had a large network of hospitals that worked under. It was yeah, they had hospital clinics and psychiatry and a number of other, and it has its own hospital too. But the Royal Victoria was the main McGill hospital, but they were a network of 8 different hospitals in Montreal. So
Mhm.
my brother, this was way back in the 50s, but even when my brother went for this not experimental, but was investigation,
Mhm.
investigative kind. treatment, whatever. What do you call
Mhm.
that? Um, he went to a McGill hospital right next door to McGill, basically. So who knows? They have our records. The more they know about us, Obamacare. They know everything about you. It's happening everywhere.
Mhm.
They if they decide they want to eliminate you for some reason,
They make you take a vaccine, for instance.
there's many ways to do it.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that was cool.
It was
Great.
cool.
To have my Leonard Cohen dream shattered. You always start rustling the mic once
I
we start recording.
I'm shocked that Anne is over 6 feet tall. I
Yeah.
love it. The
Yeah.
Tall Girls Club. That
What
was amazing.
What is your official height?
It used to be 5'11". I think I've been demoted to 5'10 3/4". I need
It's
to get an adjustment.
It's that you've been losing inflammation. That was a quarter inch of inflammation. Heel inflammation.
Maybe. Or head.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Your ego is shrunk. So.
Exactly. Maybe it was my hair that day was shorter. I don't know.
Anyway, that was a delightful conversation.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. It was so interesting, so intense talking about her childhood stuff. That was really, really intense.
Yeah, I've heard her say in conversations, because she's been asked before if she's ever explored this in therapy or hypnotherapy. And she's like, no, I'm fine. Like, I don't need to dig into that. I don't need to
exactly.
unearth the stuff. I live a fairly functional life now. I'm
Yeah.
just going to stop while I'm ahead.
Yeah. I've seen some pretty horrifying images, photographs of experiments that they were doing with kids and lots of different situations. And it is horrifying for any child. I think the people that were feeding children from orphans into these hospitals is just unconscionable and really sad when it's someone from a military background. And I think there's probably, we didn't go into the details, but I think there's probably more than one thing going on there. I think, yes, maybe there was some manipulation, but also there was potentially some mind control happening with the parents,
For sure.
so, it becomes a chicken or the egg thing, like which came first? Was it that he, and him being, late coming back from leave, that could have been a manipulation to put him in that situation where he felt beholden, so it's all, when you're talking about these people who are doing these types of experiments, you really can't put anything past them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're willing to strap children down and inject them with LSD, I mean, Jesus fucking Christ, what won't you do? Yeah, intense stuff. I can't even imagine. I mean, there's still, as much as I dig into this stuff, and I think this is one of the reasons I keep going back to this subject, is because there's still a part of me that doesn't accept it. It's not that I think that anybody is lying by any means. I totally think all of this stuff goes on, but on a gut level, on like a really visceral level, I think I still haven't, like, I can't even go there. I can't even go through to a place where what it must be like to be in a situation like that, or to witness something like that, or much less instigate something like that.
Yeah, I think maybe part of the benefit, if there could be one, of growing up in the circumstance that I grew up with, the parent that I grew up with, was that this stuff was talked about from the time I was a child. So, it was, my mom was talking about Operation Climax. My mom was talking about, Disneyland and Disney World being used for experiments, them, these people, however you want to label them, putting smallpox and measles on door handles to see how this would spread, so it is not even slightly outside of the realm of possibility, the level of torture and
Oh,
torment
yeah.
that our guests have talked about, and expressed. It is totally within the realm of possibility that these things have happened and are still happening and
Yeah.
happen with, uh, people who are coming across the board illegally, people who have their children taken away from them and then put into foster care. So, I think that's the thing that is so upsetting, is to think that the government, their official claim is that MK Ultra, that program has stopped. That iteration of the program may have
Yeah.
stopped, but they're calling it something else now.
They're calling it COVID.
Well, yeah, but there were a lot of things before COVID
Of
that
course.
have been going on
But
for
all of
decades.
this is a chain reaction, and this
Yeah,
current situation has been set up in stages, and it's been unfolding for decades.
yeah,
So that's why it went for the most part without a hitch, and was inculcated by the normal member of the population, and then they were turned into the perpetuators of the psyop,
right.
which
Well,
that was the ingenious part.
what I have been, I think, where you have expressed some resistance, and where I have landed, because it's been something that has been ingrained in my brain since I was a little girl, is that media across the board, regardless of the type of media, has some form of mind control embedded in it. And I don't need to convince anyone of that. That's just a fact. And I think that there's different reasons that that is happening. And what Anne is just reinforcing is that these are experiments, and part of an experiment is doing something and then keeping track of the effect of that thing.
You don't think that I know that about media? Have you seen the bumper stickers on my van?
Yes, but you hold certain
You're
things dear to
you're
you.
painting with a broad brush. I can hold both of those things at the same time in my realizing that that happens, and knowing what my personal experience of it is. That you
Right.
don't understand that I can separate those two things.
I do. But I also think that those things have, like that music, for example, can have mind control elements and aspects to it. And I think that's one thing that Anne was talking about, is that Leonard Cohen's music has aspects of mind control in it. And a lot of it can be dark imagery. And the idea is not to necessarily make people do something, it's to subconsciously maybe set a tone for a generation of people. And I think that it works. I mean, that's my vote.
Where's the ballot place? Anyway, hopefully we will have Anne on again. And
Yes.
I was actually just going to say, I was going to ask you about Leonard Cohen, but let's save that for another show, since we're already over halfway through this show, and I knew there was a lot of Leonard Cohen information. But I'm glad we did. Um, yeah, and there's always more to discuss, as she alluded to towards the
Yeah,
end of the conversation.
absolutely.
But it was great. As I said too in the conversation, I first heard her on Jason's show, The Liminalist, Jason Horsley, who's going to be on in, I believe, September. Um, yeah, and it's one of those things where I always, I don't like sacred cows. I always want to, um, I'm always up for, um, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Killing my idols. That would be the drastic way of putting it. But cutting situations down to size, even if it's something that's unpleasant for me because I hold it dear. And the Leonard Cohen situation was one of those because I hold his music, at least the first four albums, very dear to my heart. When I first heard them in my 20s, I really gravitated towards the lyrics. They were almost biblical in the weightiness that they had and the way that they were sung, and especially his first album. There's just something about it that has a very autumn feel to it to me. And something dark, something subtly dark. But I was dark back then. I still have dark aspects of myself. So I sort of gravitate towards things like that. But, knowing this stuff and listening to his lyrics, it makes a lot of things that I didn't really pick up on at the time. It makes sense. Like he's talking about a lot of oblique subject matter that don't seem to have anything to do with a love song, but in the greater scheme of things, yeah, okay. I see what he probably meant by that now. So yeah, it's very interesting. So again, I will still listen to Leonard Cohen albums. I listened to some tonight. We listened to some tonight. And I will listen to him again. I just think it's an interesting layer on top of that. I don't feel like all of a sudden I'm going to be mind controlled into doing something that I wouldn't do ordinarily. And I'd like to think I'm a pretty sophisticated person. So that's why I don't fear listening to Led Zeppelin, because I can still, that gives me a vibe that I had when I was a kid. And I just tap into that feeling. I don't necessarily like, have I lived any of Led Zeppelin's lyrics? No. Are they even livable by a mortal human being? Probably not. But I relate it to a vibe that I had when I was growing up. And that's what I tap into. I'm not looking for social cues or learning how to behave in a certain way,
Right.
or
Right. But it's
we're going to get
easy.
into this
No,
conversation
it's
again.
easy to say that. I think that's where you're missing the point, from my
I think you're
perspective.
missing the
I
point.
think that's where you're missing the point from my perspective, is that you are denying that mind control exists by saying that you are connecting that music to a certain time period in your life. So maybe now as an adult, you're not as influenced by that. But as a child, this is why they use children in these experiments, because children are so porous and such sponges. They're so open that you can play anything, and a child will absorb that piece of information. And it's like the social contagion of gender dysphoria now. It's like the social contagion of um, any kind of mass behavior that people get involved in. So I'm just saying it's important to be able to examine those
Of
things.
course, and I do. God, I mean, you know me. You live with me. You know that I'm a self reflective analyzer of every fucking thing.
Except for Led Zeppelin.
No, it just doesn't keep me from listening to them. Like, if I were tempted to be mind controlled by something, it would be about songs. I'm not even about ready to say something funny.
No, I was thinking something funny. I
Oh,
was
okay.
thinking about butterscotch chips.
Non sequitur.
Songs about cookies.
No, songs about relationships. Serious songs about relationships. I think Air Supply would have been more mind control to me than Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin were fucking comic books. Like, that's like saying I'm being mind controlled by Spider-Man or something like that. I don't see the connection at all. I never That was an unreal world of fantasy that I used to
Right,
escape into.
right,
I would be more apt to have taken clues from England Dan and John Ford Coley songs than.
right. But they're now putting, uh, like the, trans flag in Spider-Man uh show, like in Spider-Man movies, but subliminally they're putting it like in the background, where it's not something that your brain is absorbing that information, but your consciousness isn't aware of it.
Oh, my consciousness is aware of everything. Nothing slips past this filter. That's because that's the rules that I set for everything that goes into this mind. I'm a discerning, multidimensional, sentient being. Can't even continue that line, that description, without cracking up, because I can't think of what I'm really trying to get at. I just think I understand it, so I'm less susceptible to it. So maybe I'll discover different later on down the line, but right now I think I'm savvy. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to cover about this great conversation that we just had, or the subject matter involved?
I think we did it justice.
Cool. Hopefully people won't have to hear us continue that discussion many more times.
Why not? I'm sure it's a discussion many people are having.
Perhaps, yeah.
Lots of people are trying to. We are in an age right now where there is a lot of mind control happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been going on forever, but it's
Right.
very more sophisticated now than it's
Yeah.
ever been before.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember exactly verbatim what Frank Jacobs said during our interview, but he said something like, I watch that show, I listen to that stuff or whatever. Like, it is, I don't remember. I don't want to even try and remember what he said and put words in his mouth, but it was to the effect that I can sort that shit out, and I'm a grown up. I can come to my own conclusions about it, So anyway, I swear that's all we're going to say about it this time. Stay tuned next week for, anyway. All righty. If you have guest suggestions, recipes, ideas for what?
I do have to say, and I have said this before in other conversations with you on the show and outside of the show, that when my mother was having a nervous breakdown, she was losing her shit, and we were talking about the subject of media came up and mind control. She said, "You shouldn't watch TV. You shouldn't listen to popular music. That stuff is mind control." And I said to her at that point, and I still believe this, I said, "Mother, I am strong enough and my brain is strong enough to be able to observe that stuff and not be mind controlled by it." So I'm just putting that out there that I agree with those sentiments. Do I think everyone has that ability to discern? Absolutely
I'm not
not.
talking about everyone. Yeah.
Neither am I. Do I think everyone has the ability? Absolutely not. Do I think the methods are more sophisticated than they were in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and even the 2000s now? Absolutely.
And more blatant.
I think there's more mechanisms to control mind now, using EMFs, using cell phones, 5G, the jab. I think there's lots of different ways to do that. So I just have to end on that note.
Or I forgot the list of why anybody would want to contact us. Anyway.
Because they love us.
Okay. Or because you love us. The Melt podcast at protonmail.com.
And keep those emails flying to hunter-muse at protonmail.com.
And we are in the midst of uploading stuff to locals. Yes.
Because
and
YouTube sucks.
No, because we'll probably get kicked off Patreon.
Oh,
YouTube does suck.
yeah.
Yeah, this is a Patreon substitute, not a YouTube substitute.
Yeah.
Rumble would be the YouTube substitute.
Yeah.
I would urge you all to go to Rumble. Let's make Rumble a better YouTube.
Yeah.
Because they're picking away bit by bit at us again for episodes that have been out for 2 years.
Yeah.
So
Weird.
it's bullshit. YouTube sucks.
Yeah.
Please go to Rumble. We're also uploading stuff to Odyssey. I haven't included that link on our list of links yet because I haven't gotten them all uploaded yet. But so yeah, stay tuned. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope that you got something positive off of this. And yeah, again, fantastic things coming. 2 fantastic interviews are later on this week. So I
Yep.
hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy what's to come.
We are doing the interviews later on this week, but
Yes.
the episodes won't be out for a minute.
Yeah.
So
Indeed.
keep on keeping on. Keep on keeping on with us.
Until next time. Fare thee well.